A note before we begin today's episode, I recorded 2 interviews that I actually thought were going to exist as one episode, but when we looked at all the footage, it really just made sense to make them a 2-part series exploring the Treasure ecosystem. So I had a conversation with the Treasure founding team and with the founder of Smolverse, which is the central project in the Treasure ecosystem there, Mario, as they will say. We'll get into all of that. And then I also had a conversation with the Battlefly founder, with Battlefly being a game and a project that is building on Treasure. So I was excited to have this conversation because I remember when Treasure was the hottest thing. I think January of this year, if you folks who have been in this space for that long, and if you're listening to this podcast now in the bear market, you probably have been here since January. That white paper was such a big deal, at least in my mind. And I bring that up with the team. And it reminds me of the era when you could sell a Cyberkong for 100 ETH and Pixelmon hadn't dropped yet. And people were just excited for Pixelmon. And this is going to be the most amazing game and the reveal and whatever. Oh, if only we knew then what we know now. But I wanted to talk to this team because they're still building and they're still pushing forward entirely on this vision of a decentralized Nintendo. So I wanted to check in with them 10 months, 11 months on from the Bridgeworld white paper and talk about what they're up to now, what's going well, and really just take a look back at this project and look at where it's going. So 2 parts. We'll have the conversation with the Treasure DAO team now, and then we'll simultaneously be releasing an interview with the Battlefly founder, Ben, and you can go check that out if you're interested. Thanks so much for listening. With me, I have John and Karel, co-founders of Treasure, and we have Santi, who is the GM of Smolverse, which is really the Mario of this Nintendo ecosystem, the flagship game of Treasure. So we are going to talk about everything you guys are up to. Thanks so much for joining the pod.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Huge fans.
Oh, thank you. I was excited to have you all on because I am somebody who remembers when Treasure, and specifically the Bridgeworld white paper, hit the Twitterverse, I should say, hit crypto Twitter, 10 months ago or so. And it was such a moment and such a thing. And there was so much hype around it. We're going to talk about that. But I haven't really stayed at all aware of what y'all were doing, and how you're building. And it felt like this would be a really fun project to look at 10 months on and say, okay, what's happening now? After all that hype, we had so many projects that had all this hype, back in January. And now let's take a look and see really where you are today. So we're going to get into all that. But before we do need to hear a word from our lovely, lovely sponsors.
When it comes to NFTs, convenience often wins over security, despite scams being everywhere. Brands and artists have no other choice by complying with big marketplace terms and weak security because no good alternative exists. Which is what prompted Ledger to fix the problems of NFTs themselves and launch Ledger Market. The Ledger Market provides an end-to-end secure NFT experience for brands, artists, and users, enabling true ownership and control over NFT assets, from minting to storing. Ledger Market secures NFT projects via Ledger Enterprise, keeping you protected from phishing attacks and scams. And the market directs users to Ledger Live, where they can transact with a contract directly, giving clear signing details instead of blind signing and praying. Don't trust, verify with clear signing from Ledger Market. Stay up to date on the latest drops and marketplace updates by following Ledger on Twitter and joining the Ledger Open Discord, which is linked in the show notes below. BUENO is the NFT toolkit you need to launch your digital collectible on the blockchain without coding. Every step of the NFT creation process, from generation to mint, all taken care of by the BUENO NFT toolkit. With BUENO, you can load up your art layers, reorder the layers, tinker with rarity, everything you need to make your NFT project a reality. BUENO even allows you to mint your tokens on the blockchain with zero code and offers advanced minting logic like linking allow lists, airdropping tokens, and on-chain royalty configuration. As a part of their launchpad, you'll get access to forums to run surveys, email collection, and build your pre-sale list to make sure you are hooked into your own community. BUENO is full of powerful tools you need to build the most expressive NFT project possible. So go to bueno.art and start building your own collections today.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. This has been, for people who are big fans of Treasure, they might know this, but if you're not, you may not. This really started with a Loot. Another project that, if you were in the space, you can't help but remember when Loot launched. It was Dom Hoffman, former founder, the founder of Vine. And it was just a series of words. So it felt like it inverted the NFT model at the time, which was all about pictures and visuals. And this was just like, here are words and you can go and build, a metaverse out of this. And so Magic was really a response to Loot. Can you explain how those pieces tied together and what the original intent was? Magic being your money token, essentially your currency token?
We started as a Loot derivative. And as you were saying, I think it was one of the most brilliant projects I'd seen in NFTs, because most ways that users interact with their NFTs is just buying and selling them. And this presented them as building blocks for creating games. And we just thought about this as systems design. Like, what can you do with this idea of distributing NFTs to people? Well, you could connect many worlds. You could use game economies. So initially we started with just the simple idea of we'll use treasures to create economic links between worlds, and then see where that takes us. So Magic was born out of seeing all of these decentralized metaverses that were very young and popping up. And the idea was, let's just create a money that sits across all of them. It creates a treasury for the organization to keep building. And since then, we've been able to bring in a lot of ecosystem partners that see the value of this, interoperable world where you can just take your items and move somewhere else and participate in this, just really large network of games.
And at the time, were these metaverses your Decentraland, Sandbox, Pixel, Voxel? Was that what you were looking at?
No, we were looking at the ones in the Lootverse, all the ones like Loot that sprang out of this idea of. Those are sandboxes are pretty much walled gardens right now, and their version of interoperability they're striving towards is visual. So they're going to create skins and the ability to load NFTs into their worlds, which is fine. It's just a totally different approach than Loot, which was let's create game mechanics and ideas, economies that sit between many worlds.
These sort of basic primitives, how you build objects, exactly. that kind of idea. A-Gold, if I remember, launched as sort of a currency in the system. And I think, Magic was definitely secondary or tertiary or whatever it would be to like an A-Gold. How did you guys, I almost see it as like a comeback story that happened very quickly, right? That Magic seemed to develop as the one with staying power over something like an A-Gold. How did that happen? Tell us that story and why you think you succeeded there.
I think it was two things. Loot picked A-Gold. We were kind of pushing them to maybe choose Magic, with the idea being it's really hard to scale a community if you're just rewarding one world. And A-Gold, it ended up just being an airdrop with no additional inflation. So it couldn't create momentum to build anything. But beyond that, it was just building for the original stakeholders. So the idea of Magic was, there are lots of NFTs and PFPs that people like. We should be building frameworks that allow people to interact through those rather than just try and drive value back to the same 10,000 NFTs over and over. They went... I think Loot is still building really cool stuff, but not using A-Gold from what I understand anymore.
A-Gold had this sort of fixed supply that once it had been airdropped to Loot holders was done. And then how do you keep momentum and interest? And it was sort of top down in that sense. And you guys said, hey, let's build these, frameworks almost at the bottom. We'll withhold a lot of Magic. We won't just dump all the supply out into the ecosystem at once. And use it as an incentive and to reward sort of other players that start building up various metaverses and ecosystems within this broader framework. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's so funny because I think, and as I was looking back at what you guys did at the time and thinking about it in today's lens, it's like we have come so far in the last 10 months because my sense is that was a pretty novel concept then in many ways, and was an inversion of what you were seeing happening. You had the sandboxes and then your Decentralands as sort of your big players. And it doesn't at all feel radical now. It feels like almost the expectation, and you see like your other sides of the world, I believe also trying to build more like the primitives and not just be a closed walled garden. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you think this is more the mainstream, maybe crypto Twitter assessment of what the metaverse should be? Are these more like framework, primitive protocol style metaverses?
Well, I'll just say quickly, I'll let the others go. We want to build the same scale of things. We just have a different approach. Like Treasure's native collections are CC0 because we want people to things like Nouns and other successful CC0 projects.
Which was also, Dom was also involved in Nouns. I mean, Dom has spurred a lot of things in this space, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. That group of builders they've just pushed NFTs forward in a lot of ways that have yet to even fully be built, because it takes a lot of work to make NFTs functional like this. But our approach is different than Bored Apes, but we want to build like successful games that people really enjoy playing, but through a different, truly decentralized way.
Would you agree, though, that the importance being placed on ecosystems that truly are trying to kind of be more bottom up, or again, build these primitives atop which anything can be built, which I feel like was sort of what Sandbox and Decentraland have always been claiming, but they weren't really necessarily acting in accordance with that, at least in their kind of the initial ways they were setting themselves up. Like, do you think there has been an evolution in the way that people think about these metaverses over the last 10 months?
I think so. And I think it, for a variety of reasons, like I think that there are a lot of benefits to the bottom up approach. You can typically see like I often observe like activity seems much more it seems much more active. There seems to be a lot more experimentation, and it seems to move a lot faster as, sort of top down metaverses or really any sort of projects evolve. It becomes a bigger and bigger ship that you're steering. With that said, I think on the ground, like the two different approaches, you're kind of trying to solve, you end up solving a lot of different problems, largely around like coordination. And so I think that both those approaches, like bottom up and top down, will continue to exist. I would assume in the future, and they'll kind of have different benefits. And the companies that promote them will like just manifest in different ways. But I think folks are now realizing like, the benefits of an alternative of a bottom up approach, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. I think like if you take a look at the other models, it's very much like you are the audience, and we'll kind of create something, and I think for a certain type of organization or project or kind of metaverse, that kind of works. But you also need the resources to kind of craft something that is like really engaging, that the community will kind of like resonate with. I think with a truly sort of like Web3 bottom up sort of approach, especially now that you have like a community, oftentimes with like a 10,000 kind of PFP projects, like you automatically have like some degree of that, and you kind of have to engage them along the way. And so I think for tying back to Slanty's point, I think the coordination part is really hard. I think there's probably a mix of, almost top down, bottom up at the same time. And you kind of create the building blocks, the primitives that people can kind of, build on top of. If they have the kind of CC0 framework, it's not just enough to kind of give them this, PFP or some sort of asset and have them kind of run with it. It kind of works in some ways. And, we're seeing this with, WAGDI as a project. They're doing like almost a D&D sort of style like storytelling, and it's like truly kind of bottom up, but then you also need some sort of framing mechanism to kind of push that forward a little bit. So it's an interesting problem to solve for sure.
You're obviously getting into this here, but I do want to ask about like really tactically, how does your day-to-day look different than another side, or get into sort of these differences from tactically speaking, what building over the last 10 months has looked like and been like for y'all. But I do just want to stay for a moment more on going back 10, 12 months ago. I mentioned the Bridgeworld white paper. So the Bridgeworld white paper felt like such a big moment. I don't know if it felt that way for other people, but I remember Zeneca tweeting like, "This is the best white paper I've ever read. I just skimmed it. Like, is it as insane as it seems to me?" And just my timeline being filled with people being like, "This was the greatest white paper we've ever seen." Why did it hit people so hard? Why did people love it so much? What did you do that was different at the time?
Being in a huge bull run helped for sure.
Yeah, okay.
And we were
complete luck. We did nothing.
We were, I think we were pointing in the direction of things that are like definitely going to come, in my opinion. I haven't lost any faith in. You can't do many things on L1 with NFTs. If we want them to be like interactive, a lot of transactions, interoperability, it has to happen on L2, and that transition's inevitable. And, the NFT community will eventually catch up to this. Like, it will be impossible to do it affordably or to build a metaverse. And a metaverse is more than just trading a single PFP back and forth. It, involves social interaction, a lot of which would be on chain to be, a distinct feature of Web3, a Web3 form of social interaction. So all those things are still true. And it just takes a lot of work to build that out. And I think Bridgeworld was unique also in that, we from the beginning wanted to present a framework where, hey, lots of games interact through this. This is more like a tournament of games. And I think that was unique at the time.
Yeah. Do you think it was partly the comprehensiveness of the vision? I mean, the white paper was, I still have not to this day read the whole thing, partly because there's, part of it's that are gaming or technical that I don't understand, but also that's a tome. It's a long white paper. And it at a time when you had a lot of people dropping a lot of projects that even if we knew at the time, kind of turned out to be sort of half baked. You guys were presenting something that was very thorough. And I would say still, you went through a rebrand this summer, I know. And, the Medium article out about that, not nearly as long, pretty short and digestible, but there's a professionalism and sort of like a both, you can understand, the language you guys use is in general understandable. Like you guys have good copy. And that's like kind of rare, I feel like, in this space to find like good copy that feels thorough. Do you think that was a big piece of it? Corral, maybe if you want to give your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely, just like the comprehensiveness, I think attached to that was just legitimacy and definitely around that time, like there was just a lot that, like one pager kind of like light paper, I think was sufficient to still convince a lot of folks around that time. Again, bull market, very different. But I think along the way, and one of the biggest things that we've been kind of pushing for has just been to use less of the jargon, and like be a lot more digestible, and especially for us. And as we move into just, kind of this like broader adoption, not even just through kind of L1s, but also L2s, like there's, just been a lot more kind of education, a lot more, tooling, infrastructure that just makes it a lot easier for folks to kind of like get over here. But at the same time, you're seeing big brands starting to move into the space. And so I think for us, like it's, there was maybe the initial kind of user base that was very crypto native and, they came from that sort of DeFi understanding and, just generally kind of hung out, in the space. I think where we're going to go, which, I think most games are going is, we want to appeal to the next million, 10 million, 100 million kind of players. And you can't really do that in a way that, even if we look at the light paper, I think that is probably a bit too intense, for that kind of audience too. And so you'll likely have a cohort that, will love and like go through every single word that we write there. And those are also the players that we want, to engage as well. But, through the rebranding, through a lot of just like the comms, I think it's just been getting crisper, what resonates and what do people kind of like understand as an analog to like their day-to-day lives, which is why we like to call ourselves the decentralized Nintendo. But I think it is kind of like packaging that in a way that that makes sense.
And the comparison, the analogy to Nintendo is around, Nintendo they had Mario, which was their flagship IP that was very popular and drew a lot of people to their consoles, if that'd be the right term, even if it's like handheld, right? Ish. You're ishing your head. Okay, but I'm roughly right, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so they developed a big audience and then brought in other partners. They would be the publisher for other, gaming partners, and the other games were drawn to building on a Nintendo because they had the built-in audience. And they were able to build out a broader ecosystem because of that positioning in the market. And so for y'all, it's something very similar, right? Which is attract game developers to an ecosystem that has energy, has participants, have people who love Smolverse, for example, but this decentralized component as opposed to a very centralized traditional company like Nintendo. Would that be how you would explain that for folks?
Yeah, I mean it's close to perfect. I think we had to start somewhere, right? And especially with and which kind of goes back to the loot days, right? Like I think it was new, and I think to think in like such an abstract way of primitives, I think just is really tough for most people. And so part of it was, for us to kind of take on that role as a game publisher. And, we had the Bridgeworld, we had the Smolverse as like, hey, these are examples. We'll build out some sort of proof of concept and of course continue kind of building on top of that. But it's really to prove out this motto of like, well, we have two worlds. There's a single kind of money. And, at that time, like you didn't really see examples of other metaverses that were sharing a single kind of token and also sharing kind of resources. And so it was more of a, hey, this is what you can do. And so I think through that, we were able to bring in really like other game studios, developers, partners who saw that, resonated with it. And, I think today we have maybe over 10 games kind of within this treasure ecosystem. They're all, they take different shapes and sizes and forms. And, I think part of it is, kind of thinking about this Nintendo that we're building from the bottom up, partnering and not kind of keeping things closed into, what is kind of treasure. And, I think having a lot of the maybe like Web3 core, kind of principles, top of mind for us as we build.
When did you all start to feel the bear? Was it right as it was hitting in May, June, July? Or was it like after kind of, was the peak of Treasure Mania, in your opinion, January, February of this year?
That timeline makes sense. I think January, February, I think kind of around that March, April, definitely kind of April timeframe, we've started to kind of see a bit of, that sort of downtick. It was a bit self-inflicted, I will say, with, we did have a kind of exploit of sorts. But, I think with that though, it kind of proved how even like anti-fragile, I think the treasure community and ecosystem was, which in part was due to the really strong community that we have. But I think certainly from just a broader like macro perspective, we did kind of start to feel that then. So, I think as marketplace activity, a lot of that kind of was impacted. But I think it definitely did not, deter us from continuing to kind of build throughout that time frame. And even now, I'd say in the darkest of times in 2022.
Let's hope it's the darkest of times. Things get worse next month, man. I don't know what we're going to do.
I think a bunch of us have been through a few cycles. And I think you kind of, after enough of them, like you kind of start to feel the bear during the bull, like even before it starts, because you just have these, proverbial like top signals where you start noticing that things just seem a little too excited, and just industry wide. And with where crypto is or Web3 is right now, we are all pretty correlated. So once things start slowing down, it kind of affects everyone. So I would say, we probably all individually and then collectively kind of knew at some point a bear was going to hit probably this year for a variety of reasons, and kind of started thinking about it early on in the year for sure.
The way it's played out, was it like a slow and kind of steady or quick decline in just like, Discord participation and marketplace activity? Or did it feel like it's been like a dip and a plateau and where are you now? And what has the last, 6 months of that felt like for a L2 project?
Yeah, I'd say treasure wide, it was more of a kind of dip plateau, and I'd say around this kind of time frame, looking back to maybe the end of September, it's been on a slight increase. So which is good, and I think part of it is especially from where we came from, a lot of it was proofs of concepts again. But I think now, like, and it takes time to build a game, even if you're non-technical or haven't, built games before. It just takes time to build something really fun and engaging and comprehensive. And so a lot of the games that we partnered with early on, they had something in the market. Now they're actually getting close to kind of like launching and building something. And so it's kind of like a revival in a way of, even again, like despite the current kind of conditions, like, a lot of them are still building. We will have a number of things kind of launching. And so I think there's definitely that kind of tying in. Being on Arbitrum has also been, I'd say, from like a separate sort of perspective, given speculation, decentralization, when token, all that stuff has definitely kind of, aided us as well. And
what do you mean by that? Why has being on, why? Because you explain that.
Yeah. So I mean, again, all speculation, no idea if it's coming or when. But as we think about like, what's happened with other L2s, like an Optimism,
like the Arbitrum
others.
token,
exactly.
the hope that, or the expectation perhaps that Arbitrum is going to launch or airdrop a token and benefit users, etc.
All that stuff. Exactly. Understood. So it's not to say that, and I think for us, like we want a community of players, gamers. We don't necessarily want a community of speculators, but at the same time, there's, if you're here and you're speculating, we could convince you to stick around because we have great games to play. And so and there's also, appetite and I think just a healthy kind of market to have, all audiences kind of, within our community. So that's definitely kind of helped us out, quite a bit. I think, even looking back to, I think around the August timeframe, we probably had like 60,000 kind of Magic holders. Now I think we're at like 233,000.
Wow.
And so it's really kind of like skyrocketed. That said, though, a lot of them are, they're holding like very immaterial amounts of Magic. I think we have, I think 52,000 that hold at least one Magic. So I think there's still that kind of like growth overall in terms of players who are kind of coming in and, learning about L2 and learning about, kind of Magic and treasure on an L2. And so I think it's also just like a shift in education as well, which is, I think being part of that journey as well.
Yeah, I think the big thing for us has been like when the kind of going back to like when the Bridgeworld whitepaper came out, it was, I wasn't on the team, I wasn't a co-founder, but it was super exciting for me because it was like this alchemy of these really cool concepts that people who had been kind of, somewhat hardcore into GameFi and DeFi were excited about. And it matched those concepts with this really kind of high production value, very thorough form of storytelling and branding that showed that there was something accessible there. And then as a bull like really took off, things got really, really hot. We started seeing a lot of folks who maybe weren't so interested in those pieces of kind of what we were doing just enter, and they were just kind of, these are like the call. All of a sudden, you'd have Twitter Spaces where people would be asking about how to get free assets or just pondering like other interesting projects, et cetera, et cetera. So it got, it was somewhat disorganized, and I think it's hard because you want to invite those folks in, but your core audience, can sometimes get drowned out. And I think what we learned in that process was that what we should have done and what we aim to do right now with momentum we have is, we should have really doubled down on educating those new people, those new individuals who may not come from the same like DeFi or GameFi roots or even gaming roots, but would have something to do within our ecosystem. And we should have, been better about educating them, made kind of what we're doing more accessible such that, whether number go up or down, they would stick around. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why, we did do a rebrand. And that's kind of why like, we are really putting all of our language under the microscope about how we want to communicate what we do, because we want it to be true to our roots, but also, kind of grow the pie and be accessible to new folks who may come around on like a tip from a friend or something like that. If that makes sense.
Santi, talk about Smolverse in this overall timeline. When did Smolverse launch on Treasure, and what was the impetus there?
Yeah. So, well, John, you want to give the beginnings of Smolverse, and I'll kind of jump into kind of where we're at
We should
now as John started it.
clarify in case nobody know or people don't know, SMOL verse. It always sounds like SMALL, but it's SMOL verse. Go ahead, John.
Exactly.
Yeah, we launched it, I think, last November to help our marketplace with the goal of having another native collection. But it was kind of just a simple art project where your monkey's IQ could go up every day, and then you could get a larger head size, and smarter it got. And then as everyone was earning IQ, there was public land that was advancing, like as their civilization got bigger. So we kind of created this character and brought in this, really great game team that Santi could speak to just build out a larger story and user experience around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was really brilliant, I think, about Smolverse when it started was it took a kind of, again, in keeping with the trend of what we've done, it took this really fun and kind of novel concept of an evolving, NFT, which, as John said, was initially kind of through your Small's kind of brain size. And it put it through a prism of like a really accessible form of IP and art. So, when you see a Small, they're very cute, they're very fun, and that's intentionally so. And what's been great since we've launched is a community that we built. At least what I love about it and what got me excited about it is, they're very creative and very welcoming. And, I think this ties to a lot of what we've been talking about, although in a slightly different way. When you join the Smolverse, for most people, their moment of delight, like what really hooks them, is they buy a Small, or sometimes they don't have a Small. They just enter the community, and oftentimes another person in the community makes them a custom Small. So what'll happen is they'll say, "Hey, Carly, are you a fan of, XYZ band or XYZ sports team or just a movie?" And you'll let them know a little bit about yourself, and they'll make you sort of a PFP that you can use that kind of goes through the art prism of the Smolverse. And we started observing that from day zero all the way through the summer. Even just now we had Scottie Pippen, like 6-time NBA champ, come on Twitter and say, "I want to get into NFTs." And one of our team members made him just organically on Twitter, made him a custom, and he was super excited about it. And so
wow.
That's been super fun, because what that shows to us is that what we're doing is we're kind of giving people a representation of a little bit of their identity on via the Smolverse, and that's super exciting to us, and we're leaning into that really hard. And the reason we are is because we have a bunch of artists in our community, and so we kind of have this perfect pairing of artists, creatives, as well as people who want to represent themselves in just slightly more nuanced and dynamic ways than like a static Bored Ape or a static any NFT and any PFP. And I think that keeps with the trend of kind of an evolving NFT. And so that's been what we're doing, what we've done sort of organically over the summer, and we're leaning into via letting folks kind of now get skins, et cetera. And then in the long run, where that takes us is it sort of serves as the foundation for a proper game that we're launching called Smolville, that we're working on with a DAO called Strider, which is comes from the AAA gaming world. And so we're using sort of this bottoms up IP generation, identity generation to sort of lay the groundwork for that game, which we're really excited about. And then in between, doing a bunch of community events and other sort of experiences for folks to kind of continue to develop themselves in the Smolverse, if that makes sense.
Totally. What can you tell us about Smolville, the game? And I'll caveat that with, I admit, I don't feel like I'm the clearest on GameFi and that sort of blend of DeFi and gaming. And I sort of have this impression of it as like either a little bit like a slot machine, or like a play to earn that ultimately collapses in on itself. So with that sort of framing maybe in mind, we'd love to hear what you can tell us.
Yeah, no, and I know exactly, how you feel, or kind of, I can echo what you're saying with GameFi, and we've had these conversations internally. There definitely are really interesting applications of GameFi that take advantage of like novel and very interesting economic concepts to create, kind of bootstrapped economies. And then, there's the way that we're approaching it through the smalls is a little different. We certainly we lean into GameFi when it makes sense, but we also kind of want to we're not really trying to be a project that just kind of continuously creates money out of thin air and then kind of sees what happens. What we're kind of looking at it more for is you participate in the Smolverse via games that feel more like experiences. And then out of those experiences, you get effectively like something that you can use to update your PFP or update sort of your small. And so we just did like an on-chain game that was like, small. It was sort of a proof of concept. It was 1,000 people. It was called Smalloween. And basically the idea was that you would coordinate with other smalls via this game to defend yourself against a witch, it's very Halloween themed, a witch that was turning people into ghouls. And then when you would turn into ghouls, you would sort of then try to get other smalls to turn them into ghouls. So it was a fun game, and it was really just meant to help people get to know each other and also kind of, encourage social coordination. And then at the end, if you win, if you're a survivor, you can get a certain set of costumes that you can put on your small. And we have like an equip station and are kind of building out a vanity so you can sort of update your small and update your PFPs as much as you'd like. And then, after that, that kind of has gone really well. And a lot of folks really enjoyed it because it was a good way to sort of experience something together and then have sort of an outcome of it that, leans into their identity and is less about like getting yield or sort of generating a return. So that's sort of how we think of GameFi right now in the Smolverse. It's like you're out getting experiences online, on the web, and you come out of it with like a more nuanced and multidimensional identity that you can define through your PFP. And our hope is that as more people do that, and we have a bunch of other ones teed up, as more people do that, they can just be more expressive on the web, and we can make more of an inclusive community within the Smolverse and also help people identify with each other in a much easier way. And then where that leads us is to hopefully what is a much more exciting gaming experience that will be Smolville, which will be sort of, what I think a lot of folks have as a vision of a proper game that incorporates, Web3 assets and Web3 identity into, the sort of mainstream gaming level of production and storytelling that we've grown accustomed to seeing from publishers like Nintendo. As far as like what the inspiration behind the game itself, I mean, I would say from like what we've been discussing, it will feel more like a Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing style game that's more about fun and community building. It's not going to be like Halo or Call of Duty or anything.
Which Mario isn't either, like.
Yeah, which Mario isn't either. And so we're excited about that. But where the rubber will really hit the road is ensuring that people can take the identity that they built through the Smolverse and incorporating into that game. And that's I think what's really important, because that's sort of what Web3 is all about. It's about helping you represent yourself in like the Mario verse and not just cosplay as Mario, if you will. So we're excited about that. And I think, again, like, as I said earlier, all this is kind of the big mission behind this is to expand the funnel for folks who feel comfortable in Web3, feel like they have an identity in Web3, can express themselves in Web3, and hopefully try to introduce, use this as sort of a gateway to a bunch of other stuff going on in Treasure as well.
Yeah, I think the other important thing to highlight is also on the process itself. We, speaking kind of walled gardens and speaking about, kind of like from the publisher perspective, one of the opportunities that we can kind of do with this that we've kind of baked in since day one of starting kind of the build out is really to, almost make building the game a game in itself. And so, through this, kind of very community driven approach, we have a lot of these kind of engagement mechanisms that help to actually inform, potentially the storyline, how this game unfolds, the different mechanics that we're going to use. And so, we're working towards, kind of, up until really that kind of like launch or early kind of like vertical slice that we call of like a demo of sorts, being able to have some, a lot of the kind of community engagement to be folded into it. And that's with the help of Strider. And I think it's maybe important to call out as well that this team is incredible, and we've been able to kind of lean on them as just experts who've built games like GTA San Andreas, Harry Potter's Hogwarts Mystery, and just like games that people have played both on desktop, both on mobile, and kind of leaning into that experience. As part of this, though, we're standing up at Treasure like a game studio proper that is going to be solely focused on building out this game. And so it's kind of building out our own capabilities of having, a game director. She started this Monday, actually, on November 14th. So that's exciting. And, her and her team will be spending, their time just building up Smolville. As we go towards launch, if it makes sense, they can roll off, build the next big title for Treasure, or keep it going. We're hopeful that this is going to be a kind of multi-year sort of endeavor as we grow this out.
Where does your funding come from? Are you still running on runway from the bullish of days, or what?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. So we had 2 rounds of funding. One kind of 3 million rounds back in November 2021, before all this started. That was led by 1KX and a whole bunch of amazing folks. We had a recent kind of bridge rounds, 3.5 million, back in kind of September, I think, of this year. So a bit of a injection, actually well-timed, in light of everything. And then we also actually had a partner, Battlefly, actually, who, had the conviction to essentially buy up a ton of Magic. And all of this is public. It went through our DAO and all that stuff. So they bought up, I think, around $4.5 million kind of dollars worth of Magic. This is to really power their game, which also kind of speaks to, just the use of Magic to, in a lot of ways, like you have games, they'll spin up their own tokens, and, you have the kind of flexibility to do that. I think within Treasure, you can still do that. There may be a mix of using that token and Magic, or you can just use Magic yourself. And so depending on kind of the project, that they might look to kind of take that on. So a lot of that has been kind of taken in, but beyond that, we have this, kind of like flywheel of sorts where, we take in platform fees from our marketplace, from the collections that we spun up. We also have collection royalties as well. All of that has kind of powered, a lot of the kind of revenue that we get in. There's also Bridgeworld as a game that takes in revenue. So I think collectively from like a USD perspective, we've probably taken in 31 million in Magic, obviously, different sort of story now. But, I think all of this has helped to kind of power, what we kind of use. We actually haven't used any of it to kind of sell off from like an OpEx perspective. Really, the intent is for us to kind of use this, recycle it, and kind of provide this as incentives back to builders, to kind of come in and grow and build something within the ecosystem.
Yeah, I can just we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that like a lot of what we do that we maybe haven't talked about as much is try to power the ecosystem. We have all of it goes to a DAO vote that all community members can vote on, but we do have a series of grants and other sort of programs that are intended to power builders who, some of them are working like on Smolverse partnerships and building games for Smolverse. Some of them are working on their own proper games, and that's large part of what makes us successful, as well as those partners.
COINSHIFT is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses that need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage its treasury, and COINSHIFT offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the highly secure Gnosis Safe. With COINSHIFT, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasury management to expressive, flexible, and multi-chain treasury features, such as global user management, global contacts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. COINSHIFT even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Masari, COINSHIFT is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. You have to keep up with the frontier, and COINSHIFT makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless. We're all bullish on NFTs, but gaining exposure to NFTs as a whole is difficult. How are you supposed to gain broad, generic exposure to an industry that's designed to be unique and non-fungible? CRYPTEX has the answer. CRYPTEX Finance produces synthetic tokens that lets you get exposure to areas of crypto that you otherwise couldn't. Their first product, TCAP, provides broad exposure to the total crypto market cap of all crypto assets. And their second product, JPEGZ, gives you the ability to get exposure to the entire NFT market. It's the first real NFT index token, so you don't have to go hunting for rares or finding under the radar opportunities. You just need to own some JPEGs, because JPEGZ tracks all NFT collections with real-time exposure. This is a first-of-a-kind product from CRYPTEX, who has worked in close collaboration with Chainlink for months to ensure accurate price feeds for true exposure. Live minting and trading of JPEGs will open at the end of Q4, so make sure you stay up to date with CRYPTEX Finance by joining their Discord, Telegram, or following them on Twitter.
The DAOs, do they vote on like bringing investors on? Or is that sort of a decision that's made? There's a little bit of a wall between like DAO decisions and then some core corporate decisions.
Ultimately, we will, it's also something that's like a bit tricky, operating as a DAO. We do the upfront work, but to get it approved for us to use some of the tokens that we've kind of, kept aside for situations like that, we'll have to call a DAO vote. Hey, these are the investors. They've committed X amount. We should bring them in because of this. And here's the vote. So it's been successful kind of both times. And this is one of the things that adds a bit of kind of burden into the process of just operating in this like fully kind of decentralized kind of reality.
I mean, that's impressive. I think very few projects, I can't off the top of my head think of others that I know of that like brought the question of taking outside capital to a vote by their members. That's like a standing functional project. I feel like that's been a point of tension if, in these communities has been, oh, I don't really own this, the VCs own it, et cetera, et cetera. Clearly you guys have decided this is worth it. That the kind of pain and struggle of having to galvanize a collective in order to make decisions or determine final decisions. Why do you feel like this model, this like real DAO, super decentralized kind of collective action model is poised for success, or in what ways can it give you an edge?
Yeah, I think the bottom up approach, right? And this having it being very community driven, having, people who feel like they have skin in the game to really influence, like what the outcome is. And, we've seen this in so many ways, even beyond just like voting on, some sort of proposal that either we or the community kind of puts forward. It comes through, we have this almost like a news publication within the Treasury ecosystem called Treasure Times. We had something else called Small Street Journal, and it's just active community members who just feel that they have like enough in it to, be able to participate and also want to participate. You do see this in, kind of NFT ownership as well. But I think to the degree of having something like, our token Magic kind of also help to inform, a lot of this. We've had people who have built tools, who have created just like infrastructure that we can then use as a DAO across the board that other builders and other games can leverage, and having this kind of act as a layer on top of it. So I think there are maybe some sacrifices from a velocity perspective, but I think from a openness of, and especially in this kind of context of Web3, people know how much we have from a treasury perspective, all of the things are public, and so they can, look it up anytime they want. And so it adds, I think, this layer of, almost trust, but it should be in a trustless kind of manner as well. Just again,
trustlessness creates trust.
Exactly.
The lack of a need for trust because it's all transparent is what what gives the trust. Why Arbitrum?
Arbitrum and this, I think we've always been ETH maxis, kind of since early days. I think with, and around that kind of time frame, like there were an assortment of different, other L2s, other networks that we could have launched and moved on to. I think for us, it was, again, the technology, the security assumptions that, Arbitrum kind of allowed, the technology from, and also their team. And we, have worked closely, with them really since day one before we migrated over, there was tons of support there. But even after we've launched, which, we couldn't have really forecasted aside from just how things have unfolded, but, they've been insanely helpful. And so I think as we have kind of carved out space on Arbitrum, we've really emerged as like the dominant NFT and gaming ecosystem currently on Arbitrum. And so, even just looking through, sort of that lens, like we account for 95% of like all of the NFT and all of the gaming related transactions on Arbitrum. Should that be the case in the future? Probably not. And, I expect that there will be, and there are, an increasing amount of like other games, other projects that are coming on board, which, is a testament to just, the Arbitrum team and, how active their BD and partnerships team, which, is growing at a, incredibly rapid rate. And so having, the ability to kind of lean on that side of things. And, I think for us, like having the ability to, shape and, or help to inform what that agenda kind of looked like. It was, the ability for us to become, kind of a big fish in what we thought was a growing pond. It was small at first, but, much bigger now. And, it was kind of that white space that was, pretty much dominated from really a DeFi perspective, on Arbitrum in contrast to other L2s and other networks. And so, NFTs should be everywhere. And, I think the L2 conviction that we needed to be somewhere where things transactions were much cheaper, there was higher throughput, and we can kind of create a lot of the things that we're building now from a gaming perspective on Arbitrum.
Last question. You mentioned you've been through, I think all of you have been through multiple cycles. You've built you have a very robust vision, let's say, right? So you touch gaming, you touch tokenomics, you trust gaming economy, you touch a lot of things. You have a lot of partners you're working with, trying to attract. What are the biggest trends you're seeing, and what do you believe the next cycle, the next bull cycle, what will spark it, and what are your takes on the state of the market today?
It's hard to say what's going to spark the next bull cycle, but as far as trends, I see a lot of the space really leaning into creativity. I heard, your show, it was a wrap up, but it was about kind of what was going on with art gobblers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning how, when you actually engage with it, a lot of it's actually just really fun. And I think that that's exciting to me and exciting to the Smolverse is that folks are toned down volume and like, chasing yield and chasing gains, which, we've all been through it, has given way to folks just kind of focusing on like, am I actually having fun playing this? Or am I actually getting something out of it that makes me feel enriched? And that is really exciting to me because at least from what I've seen in gaming and just in technology in general, that usually that kind of semblance of fun is what lifts up, foundational technology in the future. So that doesn't mean like, to be clear, I'm not saying that, folks having a ton of fun is going to spark a bull run, but what I think will make the effects of the next bull run last, and we'll get more and more people excited about it, is going to be, actually engaging in fun experiences that folks feel like are enriching. And I think that, fortunately, a lot of exciting projects, even outside of Treasure, are focusing on that. So that's a big trend I've seen. I think what I really do believe a lot of what's going on in DeFi and GameFi is incredibly important and is, also going to spark a lot of sustainable economic activity in Web3. But I think it's great to see that folks are, trying to just build more fun experiences. I felt like we went through a couple of months where everyone was just trying to one up each other with the more complicated kind of like GameFi protocol pooling thing. And there's a very important time and place for that, but it's nice to see some diversity and objectives, if that makes sense.
I said that was going to be the last question, but I lied. If you have a few more minutes, I have another one, which is about the royalty conversation. And you guys launched a marketplace. I don't know exactly how many months ago, but you've got Trove, which is the treasure marketplace. There's obviously a lot of movement happening there with OpenSea's announcement. It looks like Blur is going to adopt what OpenSea is adopting, which is sort of these allow listed, blacklisted, at the smart contract level answer to royalties. What's y'all's take on that? How are you approaching it in the Arbitrum ecosystem?
We wouldn't be here without royalties. We were a fair launch, kind of free mint project. All of the NFTs, at least initially at the core, were given away for free. So we wouldn't have been able to really build, the treasury that we have today without it. And so I think it's something that, and also from a builder's perspective, and we've pulsed and talked to a lot of them. It's something that remains really important to them, and especially I think in this market. I think beyond the primary kind of like initial mint, like this is what also helps to provide longevity and, to kind of fuel, your project. Should that be the sole, kind of revenue stream? Probably not. And I think we'll start to see others emerge, and especially within gaming, like there is, I think a very clear sort of use case that we've seen some from maybe Web2 on just like in-app purchases and stuff like that you can kind of add into the mix. So that said, though, I think, there's also a question as well of, what is the appetite for collectors and traders, in this kind of market to want to kind of pay royalties. And so I think, there's almost been a bit of a race to the bottom, but we're kind of already starting off there. It hasn't really been a race. And so I think, for us, it is really, I think, providing the value that warrants, the royalties, both from a platform perspective, but also from, for the creators. And so for us and for our marketplace, I think in the lead up to now, like we've done, I think 270 million in like marketplace volumes on an L2, I think is quite impressive, arguably speaking. But for us, it's really to have this tailor-made for gaming as a vertical, but then tailor-made for treasure, and be able to do things that OpenSea and other more generalized marketplaces can't do, because of the fact that we're all about gaming. And so we can do a lot of things on, this theme of just like proof of play, being active within the treasury ecosystem, being able to participate, earn things like badges and achievements, and have this kind of inform, you as a player and as a participant, within the treasury ecosystem, which you can then do a lot of things with. You can have loot boxes and battle passes and things that, help you as a player participate in other things, and, just be, kind of engaged throughout the process. And, through Trove, what we're essentially doing with it is almost to turn it into like a Steam like experience, where a lot of this is, again, tailor-made for this use case. It's content rich. You go here to really come into this like destination for treasure games, and just explore what is around, and also from a kind of intrinsic but also an extrinsic perspective, be able to benefit from a lot of the things I kind of mentioned.
Yeah, it's imperative, I think, for us that there's an economic layer to support creators and on the Treasureverse, and even within Smalls. Like, we are only successful because we have a bunch of artists and creators who've grown up in our community or entered our community and created content, and there needs to be an economic layer to support that. I mean, we've seen that in Web2, where in the early days of like podcasting, when there weren't really a lot of sponsors and it was just kind of on like your first gen or third gen iPhone, it was a much less robust ecosystem. And now that there are a variety of ways to, support creators in the podcasting space, for example, it's so much better of an ecosystem, I would say, at least, with way more diversity, way more interesting content, awesome podcasts like this one. So so I think we feel really strongly about, using royalties and other sort of streams to support creators, at the end of the day, if that makes sense.
And just my personal belief on where it's going is, a race to the bottom for royalties, but it's also going to be a race to the token for marketplaces. We saw a little of this with Looks Rare
and Blur.
And Blur's token, but marketplaces are going to pay users in the same way DeFi would pay early liquidity miners with governance token. I imagine this will happen at a bigger scale, and ecosystems don't have to do that in financial ways, where you're creating this debt where people continue expecting yield in the form of like, this governance token that has value. If you build an ecosystem of games, you created like a world in which you can create non-monetary rewards. So this is probably one of the only sustainable incentive systems for building infrastructure that we've seen yet in crypto, and NFTs will be able to achieve it. So projects that can envision something like that for their own ecosystem will do well against these aggregators who are paying their users just not to go elsewhere. But if people can't adapt, then they'll probably be really hurt by this trend. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I am glad to see you all still just very much building and optimistic, it feels to me. And it's exciting. I think there can be a lot of pessimism about the space where we're recording this like a week out from the FTX news. And so people sometimes feel, I think, hopeless, maybe too strong of a word, but definitely like, oh my God, what are we doing? And it's great to remember that so many projects are still here and as excited as ever for the future. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing this podcast. Like, it's so helpful to have this. Like, during bear markets or any market, it can feel very lonely for anyone, and being able to tune into this continuously throughout the week, absolutely, I think motivates all of us as builders, and I think motivates the ecosystem as a whole. So thanks so much for your work.
Thank you.
Totally agree. Thanks so much. It's a good time because, bad time, but also good time because overpriced JPEGs are just priced JPEGs now.
Yeah, exactly. Many are underpriced, probably. I hope it comes to pass that we got underpriced. Fantastic. Thanks, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.